The afternoon sun was bright over San Diego, making the sea glimmer like glass. The air smelled of salt and diesel from the nearby docks. It was a big day at the Veterans Center, an annual event where former soldiers and officers gathered to honor those who had served. Flags waved, brass bands played, and people wore their uniforms with pride. Among the crowd walked a woman who didn't seem to want attention. Her name was Elena Cross. She moved with quiet confidence, her steps light but steady, her eyes scanning the area like she was trained to see everything at once. She wore a dark Navy SEAL uniform, old, faded at the edges, with her last name stitched neatly above the pocket. She didn't smile much, but there was something about her, something that made people step aside as she passed. At first, no one questioned her. Veterans greeted her with nods. Some even saluted. She responded respectfully, saying little. When an elderly man asked which team she had served with, she simply said, "Team 6, sir," before quickly changing the topic. Her tone was calm, her face unreadable, but not everyone was convinced. A young officer named Lieutenant Rogers, who was helping run the event, noticed something odd. He had seen every SEAL's name in the registry for that year. Elena's wasn't there. He looked again, double-checked, but still nothing. He thought maybe she had written her name wrong on her tag, or maybe she was just wearing the uniform for a relative. But when she spoke about missions and training, her words were too precise. She knew things only real SEALs should know. Rogers became suspicious. He quietly called security and reported that a possible impersonator was at the event. Within minutes, 2 MPs approached Elena. One of them asked politely, "Ma'am, may we speak to you for a moment?" Elena didn't resist. She simply turned, nodded, and followed them toward the back hall. Her face stayed calm, though her eyes looked tired, as if she had been through far worse. The officers led her into a small room behind the main hall. Inside, they began asking questions. Where did you serve? Who was your commanding officer? What was your BUD/S class number? Elena answered each question carefully, but not fully. When asked for documents, she said her service records were sealed. That raised eyebrows immediately. One of the officers crossed his arms and said, "Sealed? That's convenient." Elena looked straight at him. "Not for me," she said quietly. By then, several veterans and officers had gathered outside the room, whispering. News spread fast through the hall. They caught a fake SEAL. Cameras were raised, voices got louder. Someone muttered that she was just another con artist trying to get free benefits or respect she didn't earn. After an hour, military police arrived and officially detained her. They took her bag, her uniform, even her dog tags. When they placed her in handcuffs, she didn't fight. She only asked one question. "Am I being arrested for telling the truth?" The MPs didn't answer. They just escorted her outside, where a crowd had gathered. It was an uncomfortable scene. Some people shouted at her, calling her a disgrace. Others just watched, confused. The same people who had saluted her earlier now turned away. Elena kept her head high, her expression calm but distant. Her eyes, sharp and pale gray, didn't show anger, just quiet disappointment, maybe even sadness. As she was pushed into the back of the military vehicle, she glanced up at the sky. The sun was beginning to sink, painting the clouds orange and gold. She murmured something under her breath, so softly no one heard it. Back at the base detention facility, they processed her. Fingerprints, photographs, paperwork. An officer wrote impersonating a SEAL on the charge sheet. When he read it out loud, she gave a small, almost tired smile. "If only you knew," she whispered. Inside the gray cell, she sat down on the narrow metal bench. Her uniform had been taken away. She now wore a plain jumpsuit. For hours, she just sat there in silence, staring at the wall. Every once in a while, she rubbed her right forearm, where an old scar ran across her skin. A scar that looked more like a brand than an injury. The guards changed shifts. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with judgment. One young guard asked, "Why would you pretend to be one of them? You know how serious that is." Elena didn't respond at first. Then she said softly, You think pretending is easier than being forgotten? The guard didn't understand what she meant, but her tone made him stop asking questions. By midnight, her arrest report had been filed, and higher authorities had been notified. Her background check came back strange. No criminal record, no fixed address, and very little trace of her life at all. It was like she appeared out of nowhere. The next morning, a senior investigator came to question her again. He walked in with a folder full of papers and said, "You've caused quite a mess, Miss Cross. You're not in any sealed database. You're not even listed as a veteran. So who are you really?" Elena just looked at him and said, "Maybe you're looking in the wrong files." Her calmness frustrated him. He slammed the folder shut and left the room. Outside, rumors continued to spread. To everyone else, Elena Cross was just another fraud who got caught. But to those who looked closely, there was something about her that didn't fit the pattern. Her bearing, her scars, her silence. It all hinted at something more. And somewhere far away, in an office lined with medals and secrets, a general would soon hear her name, and everything would begin to change. The room was small, cold, and smelled faintly of metal and coffee. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, giving off a harsh white light that made everything look pale and tense. Elena Cross sat at the metal table, her hands resting calmly in front of her. Across from her sat Investigator Daniel Moore, a man in his 40s with sharp eyes and a voice that sounded like he'd heard every excuse in the world. He looked at her file, then back at her. "So, Miss Cross," he began, his tone polite but firm. "You say you served as a Navy SEAL. That's a bold claim." Elena didn't move. "I didn't say it. You asked, and I answered." Moore leaned back in his chair, trying to read her face. She didn't fidget or look nervous. Her posture was straight, her breathing slow and controlled. Most people he questioned avoided eye contact. But she looked right at him. Steady, calm, unshaken. It made him uneasy. He flipped open her file again. "You know, impersonating military personnel is a federal crime. People go to prison for this. So, before things get worse, why don't you tell me the truth? Where did you get the uniform? The medals? The ID tag?" Elena sighed softly. "Everything I have was given to me. Nothing was stolen." "Given to you by who?" She paused for a long moment. "By the Navy." Moore frowned. "Funny. Because the Navy says they've never heard of you." Elena's lips pressed into a thin line. "Maybe they don't want to remember." That answer annoyed him. He slammed his pen down on the table. "Enough of the riddles, Miss Cross. We checked every database, no record of you anywhere. No training, no deployment, nothing. You expect me to believe you just disappeared?" Elena looked down at her hands, then back up at him. "Yes, that's exactly what happened." The investigator leaned closer. "You know, the only people who disappear are spies, ghosts, or liars. Which one are you?" Her eyes didn't change. "The one who came back." For a few seconds, the room went completely silent. The hum of the light was the only sound. Moore didn't know why, but her calmness made him hesitate. He had questioned hundreds of suspects. Most got defensive, angry, or emotional. Elena, however, spoke with quiet conviction, as if every word she said was truth she'd already accepted. Another officer entered the room with a tray water, a sandwich, and a cup of coffee. She didn't touch any of it. Moore tried again, this time softer. "Look, Elena, I'm trying to help you. If there's been a mistake, I can fix it. But you need to give me something. A name, a mission, anything that proves you're not lying." She studied him for a moment. Then she said quietly, "Raven's Echo." Moore blinked. "What?" "That was the operation's name," she said. "Yemen, 2014. He wrote it down, though the name didn't mean anything to him. Later, when he checked it in the system, it returned nothing, no records, no files, not even a reference. It was as if the operation didn't exist. That only made him more suspicious. He went back into the room an hour later, frustrated. "I looked it up," he said sharply. "There's no record of any Raven's Echo. You just made it up." Elena tilted her head slightly. "Did I?" Her calm tone made him uneasy again. He looked closer at her arm and noticed a faint mark just above her wrist. A burn, or maybe a tattoo that had been half removed. It looked strange, like a symbol or code. He pointed at it. "What's that?" Elena lowered her sleeve. "Something I earned." Moore ran his hand through his hair, exhaling heavily. He wasn't getting anywhere. "You're not helping yourself, Miss Cross. The easiest thing you could do right now is admit the truth." "I already have," she said simply. He stared at her, trying to decide if she was playing him or if she was genuinely telling the truth. Everything about her, the way she sat, the way she spoke, felt trained, disciplined. She wasn't some random person pretending to be a soldier. But if she really was a SEAL, where was the proof? Why was her record erased? Outside the interrogation room, Moore's supervisor, Captain Alvarez, watched through the one-way glass. "She's good," he said. "Too good." "You sure she's not military?" Moore shook his head. "If she is, someone buried her file deep." "Then dig deeper," Alvarez said. For the next several hours, they continued questioning her. Different officers came in, some kind, some aggressive. None of them managed to shake her composure. When one officer tried shouting at her, she simply closed her eyes and said softly, "You think yelling scares me?" By the end of the day, Moore felt frustrated and strangely curious. This woman was either the most convincing imposter he'd ever met, or she was something else entirely. As he gathered his notes, Elena spoke again, her voice low but steady. "You're not going to find me in your system. The files you're looking for are classified under a different name." "What name?" he asked. She looked directly into his eyes. "Shadow Team, Sector 9. You'll need clearance from someone higher than you." Moore froze for a moment. The phrase Sector 9 wasn't one civilians should know. It referred to a Black Ops division so secret most officers had never even heard of it. He tried to keep his face neutral, but his hands gave him away. He clenched his pen a little tighter. Elena noticed but said nothing more. Moore stood up, grabbed the folder, and left the room quickly. Outside, Captain Alvarez was waiting. "Well?" he asked. Moore looked at him, uncertain. "She mentioned something she shouldn't even know exists." Alvarez frowned. "Like what?" Moore hesitated. "Sector 9. The captain went silent. He glanced through the glass at the woman sitting quietly in the interrogation room, her face calm and her hands folded neatly on the table. Finally, Alvarez said, "Get General Hale. Now." The next morning began with gray clouds hanging low over the base. The air was heavy, and everyone seemed tense. Investigator Moore hadn't slept much. He kept replaying Elena's words in his head. Sector 9. That wasn't a term just anyone could throw around. It was real but extremely secret. The more he thought about it, the less this woman looked like a fake. Still, rules were rules. He needed proof, not just strange words and calm eyes. So, he gathered every bit of information he could find on Elena Cross. Her file was thin, too thin. Just a birth certificate from a small town in Colorado, a school record that ended at age 17, and a passport issued only 5 years ago. No work history, no tax records, nothing. It was like she had appeared out of nowhere. Moore rubbed his temples and muttered, "Nobody just disappears for 10 years. He sent a request to the National Personnel Records Center and the Department of Defense, asking for any trace of her service history. Hours later, both requests came back the same way, access denied. The message was clear. Someone didn't want her past being touched. He showed the response to Captain Alvarez. The captain frowned. "That's strange. You don't get access denied on a false record. You get record not found." "So?" Moore asked. "So this means there's something there," Alvarez said quietly. "Something we're not allowed to see." Meanwhile, Elena sat quietly in her holding cell. The guards had given her breakfast, but she hadn't eaten. She sat on the metal bench with her hands folded and eyes distant, like her mind was somewhere far away. Every time a guard passed, she watched their movements with quiet attention. Habit, not fear. Around noon, Moore walked in with a folder and a small evidence box. He placed them on the table in front of her. "Elena," he began, "we're trying to help you. But your story doesn't make sense. We checked everywhere. There's no trace of your service, no record of any mission, no financial trail. You have no address, no family, no anything. That doesn't happen by accident." She didn't speak. He opened the box. Inside were her belongings. A silver dog tag, a small folding knife, a few medals, and a worn photograph of 4 people in military gear standing near a helicopter. The photo was old and slightly burned at the edges. Moore slid it across the table. "Who are these people?" Elena looked at the picture for a long time. Her face didn't move, but her eyes softened slightly. "They're gone," she said finally. "Gone where?" "Buried," she said simply. "No graves, just memories." Moore leaned forward. "You expect me to believe this? That your whole team vanished and no one wrote it down?" Elena looked up at him. "Sometimes missions don't make it into the history books." He stared at her, unsure whether to believe her or not. Then he took out one of the medals, a Navy Cross, scratched but real. "You know how hard it is to fake one of these?" he said. "We had our experts look at it. It's authentic, down to the last engraving. But it's registered to someone named Lieutenant Eric Dalton, dead since 2014. So tell me, how do you have it?" Elena's eyes darkened for a moment. "Because he gave it to me before he died." Moore blinked. "Why would he do that?" She looked at the table and whispered, "He said I earned it." For the first time, Moore didn't have a comeback. There was something about the way she said it, soft, steady, heavy with grief. That didn't sound like a lie. He turned off the recorder for a moment. "Elena," he said quietly, "if you really are who you say you are, help me understand. Why hide? Why keep silent?" She took a deep breath and said, "Because silence was the deal. Some things we did were never meant to be spoken about. We were told we didn't exist. But when your name is erased, people start to forget you're even human." Moore leaned back slowly, staring at her. Outside the room, Captain Alvarez was watching again through the glass. He whispered to another officer, "She's not faking this. Look at her eyes. That's the look of someone who's seen things she can't unsee." Still, Alvarez ordered Moore to collect solid proof. "Stories aren't evidence," he said. "We need facts." So Moore took Elena's knife to the lab for testing. It was a standard military issue, but the serial number had been scratched off. However, under a UV light, a faint engraving was still visible, S9-14C. Moore froze when he saw it. The S9 looked like an abbreviation for Sector 9. He showed the result to Alvarez. "You still think she's lying?" Alvarez didn't answer right away. He looked troubled. "Get someone from higher up," he said. "Someone with clearance to see what Sector 9 really is." By evening, word had reached a few important ears at the Pentagon. One of them belonged to General Marcus Hale, a man known for being part of several classified missions himself. When he heard the name Elena Cross, his face went pale. He didn't say much, just picked up the phone and said, "I'll handle this myself." Back at the base, Elena sat quietly as the guards checked her cell again. She could hear footsteps in the hall and whispers through the door. She knew something had changed. She didn't smile, but her eyes held a strange calm, as if she'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. When the door finally opened, the guard stood straight and said, "Ma'am, General Hale is on his way." Elena nodded slowly. "Then it's time," she said softly. The guard frowned. "Time for what?" She looked at the gray wall and replied, "For the truth to stop hiding." The base was quiet when General Marcus Hale arrived. His black car stopped in front of the main building, and 2 guards quickly opened the door for him. He stepped out slowly, his tall frame casting a long shadow on the pavement. Hale was in his early 60s, but his posture was still firm, his eyes sharp. He had the look of a man who'd seen war and never truly left it behind. Inside the building, every officer straightened up when he walked by. The air seemed to grow heavier, more serious. Hale didn't speak much. He just nodded at the salutes and walked straight toward the interrogation room. He had already read the report on the woman named Elena Cross, the alleged SEAL impersonator who mentioned something called Sector 9. That phrase alone had been enough to get his attention. When he entered the observation room, Investigator Moore and Captain Alvarez were waiting. Moore looked tense, holding a folder filled with notes. Alvarez spoke first. "Sir, we've been questioning her for 2 days. Her story doesn't change, but there's no record of her service. None. We don't know who she is." Hale looked through the glass at the woman sitting inside the interrogation room. She was calm, still, her hands folded neatly on the table. Her face looked tired but unafraid. There was something familiar about her, something he couldn't quite place yet. He asked quietly, "Has she said anything about Sector 9 since?" Moore shook his head. "No, sir. Just the phrase once. She won't explain it." Hale's jaw tightened. "Good. She shouldn't." Then he turned to them. "I'll speak to her alone." The two men hesitated. "Sir, protocol." "I said alone." His voice left no room for argument. Hale entered the room, closing the door behind him. The sound echoed through the silence. Elena looked up at him immediately. For a moment, they just stared at each other. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. "Yes," she said softly. "General Marcus Hale, Commander of Special Operations Command. You were in Yemen, weren't you?" Hale's eyes narrowed. "You've done your homework." Elena shook her head slightly. "No, I was there too." The general didn't move. The air between them grew still. He stepped closer, studying her face more carefully. Then he noticed the faint scar under her right eye, the same scar he remembered from a classified mission long ago. His heart gave a strange jolt. "You," he whispered, almost to himself. "It can't be." Elena looked down and slowly rolled up her sleeve. On her forearm was a small burn mark shaped like a circle with a line through it. Simple, almost meaningless to anyone else. But Hale recognized it immediately. It was the identification mark used in Operation Raven's Echo, the one that had gone so wrong in 2014. Every member of that mission had carried that mark. But according to the official report, all except 4 were confirmed dead, and one of those 4 was listed as missing in action. Lieutenant Elena Cross. Hale stared at the mark for a long moment, then slowly sank into the chair across from her. His voice was quieter now. "You're supposed to be dead." Elena gave a faint smile. "So I've heard." He took a deep breath and rubbed his forehead. "We searched for you for months. We thought you were captured." "I almost was," she said softly. "But I got out. After that, everything was wiped. My file, my ID, even my name. They told me I didn't exist anymore." Hale looked down, his hands tightening into fists. He remembered that mission vividly. The chaos, the explosions, the screams in the night. They had lost 8 soldiers that day. Elena had been one of the youngest operatives. Skilled, quiet, fearless. Her disappearance had haunted him for years. He looked up again. "Why come back now? You knew showing your face in uniform would draw attention." "I wasn't trying to cause trouble," she said. "I just wanted to honor the people who didn't make it home. But when they saw me, they called me a liar." There was no anger in her voice, just deep exhaustion. Hale leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "If you're telling the truth, and I believe you are, you understand what this means. You were part of a mission the government swore never happened. If they admit you're alive, everything comes out. The cover-up, the bodies, the operation." "I know," Elena said quietly. "But I'm tired of hiding." He looked at her for a long time. There was something in her eyes. Pain, strength, loneliness. He could tell she hadn't come here for fame or revenge. She just wanted to exist again, to stop being erased. Finally, Hale stood up. "You're not under arrest anymore," he said. "Not on my watch." Elena looked surprised. "They'll ask questions. They'll get answers they can live with," he said firmly. "You were detained by mistake. That's what the report will say." He walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back to her. "Do you still have your team's coordinates?" She nodded. "Always." He gave a small smile, the kind only soldiers give when they both understand something without words. "Good," he said softly. "Some stories deserve to stay buried, but not the people who lived them." When Hale stepped outside, Moore and Alvarez immediately surrounded him. "Sir, what did she say?" Moore asked. Hale looked at him with a hard expression. She didn't have to say much. That woman is who she says she is. Alvarez frowned. But the files. Forget the files, Hale said sharply. They were erased for a reason. She's one of ours. He didn't explain further. He simply ordered them to release her quietly and destroy the arrest record. No one was to speak of it again. Later that evening, as Elena was escorted out of the base, she glanced back once at the building. The sun was setting behind the fence, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. General Hale stood near the entrance, watching her go. For a brief second, their eyes met, and he gave her a small nod of respect. She returned it, then walked away into the fading light. Free at last, but still carrying the weight of secrets no one else would ever know. The car ride out of the base was silent. Elena sat in the back seat, staring out the window. The world outside looked normal. Blue sky, passing cars, people walking with coffee cups. But for her, nothing felt normal. After years of being invisible, she suddenly existed again. In the front seat, a young soldier drove quietly. He kept glancing at her through the mirror, clearly curious. She didn't look like the kind of woman who would scare generals or erase her own past. Yet everyone at the base had treated her like a ghost. When the car stopped outside a small government safe house near the harbor, she got out without a word. General Hale was already there, waiting for her. He stood near the railing, looking at the ocean, his coat moving slightly in the wind. Elena walked up beside him. Neither of them spoke for a while. The sound of waves filled the silence. Finally, Hale said, "That mark on your arm, it hasn't faded." She looked down at it, the small circular burn with a line through the middle. "It never does," she said quietly. "They made sure of that." Hale turned to her. "You remember what it stands for, don't you?" "How could I forget?" she replied. "It was the only proof we ever existed." He nodded slowly. "Tell me what happened that night, Elena." "No reports, no lies, just the truth." She took a deep breath, eyes fixed on the water. "We were 12 in the team," she began. "They sent us to Yemen to retrieve a hostage, a scientist working for the government. The mission was supposed to last 8 hours, but someone leaked our location. We were ambushed." Her voice stayed calm, but her hands trembled slightly. "We lost radio contact 2 hours in. 5 men died in the first blast. The rest of us ran for cover. Dalton, our lieutenant, ordered us to split. He and I took the hostage. The others covered us." She paused, swallowing hard. "We reached the extraction point, but the helicopter never came. Command said the mission didn't exist, that there was no extraction. We were on our own." Hale listened silently, his jaw tightening. "Dalton was hit during the escape," she continued. "He told me to leave him, but I couldn't. He handed me his medal, said, 'You'll need this to remember who you are.' Then he didn't make it." Her voice broke slightly, but she regained control quickly. "After that, I went dark. I found shelter with a local family, stayed hidden for months until I could make it out." When she finished, Hale was silent for a long time. He finally said, "That mark on your arm, it wasn't just an identification symbol. It was a promise." She nodded. "To keep the mission secret no matter what." Hale's eyes softened. "And you kept it for 11 years. Elena turned toward him. "They told us if we ever broke silence, they'd erase everything. Our names, our records, even our family's benefits. They weren't lying. When I came home, it was like I never existed. I tried to reach out to command, but every door was closed." Hale looked angry now, but not at her. "You were one of ours, and they abandoned you. All of you." Elena shrugged slightly. "We were ghosts, sir. That's what they trained us to be." For a moment, neither spoke. The waves crashed harder against the rocks, spraying mist into the air. Hale looked at her again and said, "When I saw that mark, I remembered the briefings. Only those who completed black-level missions got it. I was told to forget what it meant. But I never did." She gave him a small, sad smile. "You were one of the few who still remembered us." He hesitated, then asked, Why show the mark now? You could have stayed hidden forever. Elena's expression turned serious. Because someone's rewriting history, sir. They're erasing more than names. They're erasing what happened in Yemen completely. Dalton, Torres, Kim, they deserve to be remembered. If no one speaks, they'll vanish forever. Hale exhaled deeply, understanding her pain. You want the truth to come out. I want the truth to matter, she said softly. We risked everything for a country that decided we were too inconvenient to exist. Hale stared out at the horizon, his eyes hard with thought. If I reopen this, it'll draw attention from people who don't like attention. There will be consequences. Elena looked down at her arm again. There already have been. For a while, the two of them stood there in silence again, the wind brushing past them. Finally, Hale spoke. That mark, when I saw it, I remembered a promise I made to the men and women we lost. I said I'd never let them be forgotten. He looked at her directly. You kept your promise. Now I'll keep mine. Elena looked at him with quiet gratitude. What will you do? I'll find a way to unseal your file. Quietly. No press, no public noise. But I'll make sure your name, and the names of your team, are restored to the record. Her eyes glistened slightly, but she didn't cry. Thank you, sir. Hale nodded once. Don't thank me yet. This isn't over. When the higher-ups find out I'm digging into Sector 9, they'll come after both of us. She gave a faint smile. I've been hunted before. He couldn't help but smile back. I know. As the evening sun began to fade, Hale turned to leave. You'll stay here tonight, he said. It's secure. I'll contact you when it's safe to move. When he walked away, Elena stood alone by the railing, the wind lifting her hair. She looked out at the ocean, the same ocean she had once crossed on missions that never existed. The mark on her arm burned faintly under the setting sun, a reminder of everything she'd lost and everything she still carried. She whispered softly, You're not forgotten. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to breathe without fear. Night settled over the harbor. The waves moved gently under the moonlight, and the sound of the wind mixed with the faint hum of passing ships. Inside the small safe house, Elena sat near the window, a cup of untouched tea beside her. She hadn't slept. Her mind was still trapped in the past, those 8 hours in Yemen that had changed everything. She could still smell the burning sand, hear the static-filled radio, and see the faces of her team. Every time she closed her eyes, the memory returned like a film that refused to end. She whispered quietly to herself, Raven's Echo. The name of the mission still tasted bitter on her tongue. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and General Hale stepped inside. He was carrying a file folder, thick, worn, and marked classified. His face looked tired, but there was a spark of determination in his eyes. I found something, he said, placing the folder on the table. Elena looked at it, hesitant. You opened it? I had clearance once, he said. Old codes still work if you know where to look. He sat down across from her and opened the file. Inside were black and white photos, printed maps, and mission reports. Most of the text was blacked out with thick lines of ink. But some words were still visible. Operation Raven's Echo, Yemen, hostage extraction, Sector 9. Elena reached out and touched one of the photos. It showed her team standing together beside a helicopter. She traced her finger over each blurred face. That's us, she said softly. Before it all went wrong. Hale nodded. The report says you were sent to rescue a scientist, Dr. Kareem Noor. He was working on satellite encryption for the U.S. government. But what the report doesn't say is that he wasn't the only target. Elena looked up, confused. What do you mean? Hale leaned forward. Your team was also sent to retrieve a data chip, a small drive containing information about a secret weapons project. Something that could shut down communication networks across entire regions. Her eyes widened. That wasn't in our mission brief. Of course it wasn't, Hale said. They used your team without telling you everything. The data chip was the real prize. The hostage was just a cover. Elena sat back slowly. The realization hit her hard. That's why they abandoned us, she whispered. When the mission failed, they couldn't risk the truth coming out. Hale nodded grimly. Exactly. When the ambush happened, they made a decision. They cut the line and declared the mission lost. Then they wiped the records. No witnesses, no questions. Elena's hands clenched into fists. They left us to die for something we didn't even know we were carrying. Hale looked at her with a deep sadness. That's what I believe. She stared at the floor for a moment, her breathing steady but shallow. Dalton knew, she said suddenly. Hale frowned. The lieutenant? Yes, she said quietly. He told me just before he was gone. He said, if they find it, the world goes dark. I thought he meant the mission. But he meant the chip. Hale's eyes narrowed. You said he gave you his medal before he died, right? She nodded slowly. Where is it now? He asked. Elena hesitated. It's safe. Show me, Hale said firmly. She stood up, walked to her small bag on the table and took out the medal. It was the same scratched Navy cross that had caused so much suspicion before. Hale held it carefully, turning it under the light. After a few seconds, he noticed a small line along the edge, barely visible. He pressed it gently, and a hidden compartment popped open. Inside was a tiny silver chip, no bigger than a fingernail. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air seemed to stop moving. Hale finally whispered, after all these years, you've had it with you the whole time. Elena stared at it, her voice barely audible. He must have hidden it there before I escaped. I didn't even know. Hale closed the compartment and looked at her seriously. You understand what this means, don't you? This is the real reason they erased you. You were carrying the most classified piece of tech in the country. Elena sat down slowly, her head spinning. So all these years, I've been hunted, erased, forgotten, because of this? Yes, Hale said quietly. If that chip ever reached the wrong hands, entire communication grids could collapse, could start wars. She took a deep breath, feeling both angry and relieved. Then maybe it's time it went back where it belongs. Hale nodded. I'll handle it, but we have to move fast. Once I access those files, they'll know. Someone's already watching us. Elena looked at him. You trust me with this? He gave a faint smile. You survived 11 years alone. I'd say you've earned a little trust. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to smile. A small, tired smile, but real. Outside, the sound of a helicopter echoed faintly in the distance. Hale stood up and looked through the window. They're coming sooner than I thought, he said. We need to leave now. Elena grabbed her bag and followed him toward the door. But before stepping out, she looked back at the folder on the table. The photo of her team lay open, faces frozen in time. She whispered, You didn't die for nothing. Then she turned and walked out into the night. The safehouse lights flickered as the door closed behind them, and for a moment, the file marked Raven's Echo sat under the flickering lamp, half open, half forgotten, but finally no longer buried. The night air was cold as Elena and General Hale moved quickly through the narrow streets near the harbor. The sound of distant sirens echoed behind them, growing louder with each minute. Hale carried a small black case, the metal and the hidden chip inside. They reached an old warehouse by the docks, its windows dark and broken. Hale pushed open a side door, and they stepped inside. The smell of salt and metal filled the air. A single light bulb flickered from the ceiling, swinging slightly with the wind. This place used to be an old storage base, Hale said. No one comes here anymore. We'll be safe for a while. Elena looked around, alert and tense. They're already tracking us, aren't they? He nodded. I accessed a restricted database. The system sent out an automatic alert. By now, someone in command knows that Operation Raven's Echo has been reopened. She frowned. They won't stop, will they? No, Hale said. Not until they have the chip, and you. For a few moments, silence filled the warehouse. The waves outside crashed hard against the rocks. Elena sat on a crate, trying to calm her breathing. All these years, I thought I was running from ghosts, she said softly. But they were real. They just wore different uniforms. Hale looked at her with quiet respect. You survived because you didn't give up. That mark on your arm, it's more than a symbol. It's proof that you did what no one else could. Elena looked down at the mark, tracing it gently with her finger. I used to hate it, she said. Every time I saw it, it reminded me of what I lost. But now, maybe it means something again. Hale nodded. It always did. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. He checked the screen. No number, just the word restricted. He frowned, then answered. This is Hale, he said. A calm voice spoke on the other end. General Hale, you've gone too far. You've opened files that were meant to stay buried. Hale's expression hardened. Who is this? You know who this is, the voice replied. Return the chip and the woman, and this will end quietly. Refuse and you'll both disappear. Elena could hear the voice faintly through the phone. She stood up and whispered, Who is it? Hale didn't answer. He just said into the phone, You erased her life. You erased 12 good soldiers. I won't let you erase the truth. The line went dead. He put the phone down slowly. They know where we are. Elena grabbed her jacket. Then we need to move. Before they could take a step, headlights flashed outside the windows. The sound of engines filled the air. Black SUVs surrounded the building. Hale cursed under his breath. Too late. He pulled out his sidearm and looked at her. There's a back exit through the storage tunnels. Take the case and go. I'll hold them off. Elena shook her head. I'm not leaving you. Damn it, Elena, he said sharply. This isn't up for debate. You're the only one who can prove what happened. That chip is your life and theirs. Go. Her eyes burned with emotion, but she knew he was right. She took the case from his hand, hesitated for a second, and said quietly, You're not like them. Thank you. He gave a small, proud smile. Go. She ran toward the back of the warehouse, her boots echoing against the concrete floor. Behind her, she heard the front doors burst open and the sound of shouting. Freeze! Drop your weapon! Gunshots rang out. The echoes bounced off the metal walls. Elena didn't look back. She found the old tunnel entrance hidden behind a pile of rusted crates and slipped inside. It was dark, narrow, and smelled of damp salt water, but it led toward the docks. She kept running until she reached the end, a heavy metal grate overlooking the ocean. She pushed it open and climbed out, gasping for air. The wind whipped her hair as she crouched low near the edge of the dock. Far behind her, she saw lights flashing and heard more gunfire. Then silence. Her chest tightened. Hale! She whispered. A few minutes later, she saw movement on the other side of the pier. A man in a dark uniform walked out of the shadows. It was Hale. His jacket was torn, and blood marked his sleeve, but he was alive. He limped toward her, breathing heavily. I told you to run farther, he said with a tired smile. She half smiled through the worry. You're hard to get rid of. He laughed softly, then looked serious again. We can't stay here. There's a naval ship anchored 2 miles out. A friend owes me a favor. They'll get us to safety. They moved along the dock quietly, keeping to the shadows. The night was deep, and the sea glowed faintly under the moon. As they reached the end of the dock, Hale stopped suddenly. Look, he said. A helicopter was hovering in the distance, its searchlight sweeping over the water. Elena's pulse quickened. They're not giving up. No, he said. But neither are we. He handed her a small radio. If we get separated, keep moving toward the lighthouse. That's the pickup point. She nodded, gripping the case tightly. What about the chip? Hale looked her in the eye. Protect it with your life. If anything happens to me, you find someone who will listen. Someone outside the system. She took a deep breath. I will. They started running again, the wind howling around them. Behind them, the searchlight grew brighter, sweeping closer. When they finally reached the end of the pier, they saw a small speedboat tied to the post. Hale untied it quickly. Get in, he shouted. Elena jumped in, clutching the case to her chest. Hale started the engine, and the boat roared to life. They sped off into the darkness, waves crashing around them. The helicopter followed, its light chasing them across the black water. Hale pushed the throttle harder. Hold on! The boat bounced violently over the waves, but Elena didn't let go. She looked back at the helicopter, her eyes fierce and determined. They can erase names, she said softly to herself, but they can't erase the truth. The sea swallowed the sound of their voices as they vanished into the night, heading toward the light of the distant lighthouse, and whatever waited for them there. The small boat cut through the dark waves like a knife, the salty spray hitting Elena's face. The sound of the engine mixed with the rush of the wind, and behind them, the helicopter's light grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared into the night. Elena turned back and saw only darkness now. No lights, no sound, just the endless ocean. Hale sat beside her, his arm wrapped in a piece of torn cloth. He was pale, but his eyes still burned with determination. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. He gave a faint smile. "I've been worse." The sea stretched endlessly in front of them. Somewhere far ahead, a faint light blinked. The lighthouse Hale had mentioned. "That's where we're headed," he said. "Once we reach the ship beyond that point, you'll be safe." Elena looked down at the black case resting on her lap. The metal and the tiny chip inside seemed so small, yet they carried the weight of everything she'd been through, all the pain, all the years of hiding. She whispered, almost to herself, "This thing destroyed my life." Hale looked at her quietly. "Maybe it's the same thing that can give it back." After nearly an hour, they reached the edge of the lighthouse dock. The sea was calmer here, and the light above rotated slowly, shining across the waves. As they climbed out of the boat, a figure stepped out from the shadows. It was a man in a naval coat, with a deep scar across his cheek. He saluted Hale. "General, we've been expecting you." "Good," Hale said. "We don't have much time." The man looked at Elena curiously. "Is this her?" "She's the reason we're here," Hale said firmly. "Get the transmission room ready." They followed him into the lighthouse, climbing narrow metal stairs that creaked under their feet. Inside, an old communications setup filled the room, monitors, radios, and a large satellite transmitter. Elena looked around. "You think this still works?" Hale smiled faintly. "It's old, but it does the job." He placed the black case on the table and opened it carefully. The metal gleamed under the light. He removed the small chip from the hidden compartment and inserted it into the transmitter's port. The screen came to life with a soft hum. Rows of encrypted data filled the monitor. "This chip," Hale said, "contains every classified detail about Operation Raven's Echo. Mission orders, communications, even the command that erased your team's records. Once the signal goes out, it'll upload to 3 different secure servers, outside the government network. They won't be able to cover it up again." Elena stood beside him, watching the code scroll across the screen. Her heart pounded. "So, the truth will finally come out." "Yes," Hale said, "and they'll know what they did to you." He pressed a few buttons, but before the upload could start, the screen suddenly flashed red. A warning appeared. "Remote interference detected." "They found us," Hale said grimly. The building shook slightly as the sound of helicopters returned, louder this time. Searchlights cut through the windows. Voices shouted from below. "They're here," Elena said. Hale turned to her quickly. "You need to finish this. The upload is halfway done. No matter what happens, don't stop it." "But..." "No," he said firmly. "You've come too far to stop now." He drew his weapon and moved toward the stairs as the door below burst open. Elena stood at the computer, her fingers trembling as she typed. The progress bar crawled slowly across the screen. 67%, 72%, 81%. Gunfire echoed below. She heard Hale shouting orders, returning fire. Then a loud crash. Her chest tightened, but she didn't look back. She focused on the screen, whispering to herself, "Come on, come on." The screen flashed again. Upload complete. A small message appeared. Data transmitted successfully. Elena exhaled shakily, relief flooding through her. But her relief turned into fear when she heard boots stomping up the stairs. She turned just as the door burst open. 2 armed men rushed in, pointing their weapons at her. "Step away from the console," one shouted. Before they could move closer, another voice thundered from behind them, "Stand down!" It was Hale. He stood at the top of the stairs, bleeding, but still strong. He fired once, hitting the light above them, plunging the room into flickering darkness. In the confusion, Elena grabbed the metal and ran toward him. They moved fast, down the stairs, out into the cold night. More soldiers were pouring onto the dock, but then, a loud roar filled the air. A naval ship's spotlight lit up the harbor, and a voice boomed through a loudspeaker. "Stand down. This area is under U.S. Naval Command." The men froze. Hale looked up at the ship and smiled weakly. Right on time, Elena helped him toward the edge of the dock as a small rescue team rushed toward them. "Get her on board," Hale shouted. 2 sailors grabbed Elena's arms and pulled her toward the boat ladder. "What about you?" she cried. He shook his head. "I'll be right behind you." But as she climbed, she saw him stumble slightly, blood spreading across his jacket. Her heart sank. "Hale!" He looked up at her, his face calm, and said, "You did it, Elena. They'll remember now." Before she could reach him, soldiers swarmed the dock again. The sailors pulled her up onto the ship as Hale turned to face them one last time. Moments later, the ship pulled away, engines roaring. Elena stood at the railing, her eyes locked on the dock as it grew smaller and smaller in the distance. Tears blurred her vision. "You kept your promise," she whispered. Days later, the story broke worldwide. Classified documents from Operation Raven's Echo were leaked across every major news channel. The names of 12 forgotten soldiers appeared on the screen, alongside proof that the government had erased them to hide their failure. And there, among those names, was one that no one could ignore. Lieutenant Elena Cross, Navy SEAL, missing in action 2014. For the first time in 11 years, her record was restored. She sat alone in a quiet apartment, watching the news. Her face was calm, her eyes tired but peaceful. She touched the mark on her arm, the one that once made her hide, and smiled. "They'll never forget again," she whispered. Outside her window, the sun rose over the harbor, golden and bright. The waves moved gently, as if the sea itself remembered her story. And somewhere deep in her heart, Elena finally felt free.